Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Welcome to Sleepy Crown, where history's quiet tales gently carry you into dreamland. Tonight, we embark on a peaceful journey through the life of Queen Philippa of Hainault, the beloved Plantagenet queen, whose compassion and wisdom shaped medieval England during the turbulent beginnings of the 100 Years' War. We'll softly explore her remarkable journey, from her early years in the Low Countries to becoming England's beloved queen, her famous act of mercy at Calais, and her enduring legacy as one of England's most respected consorts, all while the Plantagenet dynasty navigated the complexities of 14th century European politics. Before you drift away into peaceful slumber, please take a moment to like this video, leave a gentle comment about which aspect of medieval queenship you find most fascinating, and subscribe to keep these soothing historical tales coming your way. Don't be shy. Our Sleepy Crown community loves hearing your thoughts, even just a simple hello. So cozy up, close your eyes, and let these gentle whispers from 14th century England lull you into restful sleep. If you're new here, welcome to the Sleepy Crown family. Philippa, later known as Queen Philippa of Hainault, was born into nobility in the early 14th century, entering a world of shifting alliances and dynastic ambitions that would eventually bring her to England's throne. Born around 1310 to 1315 in Valenciennes, in the county of Hainault, located in what is now modern-day Belgium, she arrived as the daughter of William I, Count of Hainault, Holland and Zealand, and his wife Joan of Valois, a granddaughter of King Philip III of France. The young Philippa grew up in one of Europe's cultural crossroads, a region known for its growing trade and strategic significance between the powerful kingdoms of France and England. The precise date of Philippa's birth remains somewhat uncertain, with various chronicles placing it between 1310 and 1315. Most historians now believe she was likely born in early 1314, making her about 14 years old at the time of her marriage. This uncertainty about her birth date is not unusual for medieval figures, even those of royal or noble birth, as record-keeping was not as systematic as in later centuries. What we do know with certainty is that she was born in Valenciennes, the capital city of Hainault, a prosperous county in the Low Countries that had grown wealthy through trade and textile production. Philippa's father, Count William I, known as William the Good, was a powerful territorial lord who held multiple titles: Count of Hainault, Count of Holland, and Count of Zealand. These territories, while not kingdoms, were nonetheless significant holdings in the complex political landscape of medieval Europe. William was known for his diplomatic skills and for maintaining good relations with both France and England, major powers whose interests often competed in the Low Countries. His careful management of these relationships would later create opportunities for his daughters to make prestigious marriages. Philippa's mother, Joan of Valois, brought an impressive lineage to the marriage. As the granddaughter of King Philip III of France, she connected the comital house of Hainault to the royal house of France. Joan was known for her piety and for her role in negotiating peace between her husband and the Duke of Brabant, demonstrating diplomatic skills that her daughter Philippa would later emulate. This combination of French royal blood and the territorial power of Hainault made Philippa an attractive marriage prospect in the dynastic chess game of European royal politics. The county of Hainault in the early 14th century was a vibrant and prosperous territory situated in a strategically important region between the Kingdom of France, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Duchy of Burgundy. Its location made it a commercial crossroads where trade routes connected northern Europe with the Mediterranean world. The county's wealth came primarily from agriculture, mining, and the textile industry, particularly the production of fine woolens. Valenciennes, where Philippa was born, was one of the major cities of Hainault, known for its cloth production and as an administrative centre. The medieval Low Countries were undergoing significant economic and cultural development during Philippa's childhood. Cities like Bruges, Ghent, and Antwerp were emerging as major centres of international trade, banking, and artistic production. The region was developing sophisticated financial and commercial practices, including early forms of banking, insurance, and international trade networks. Growing up in this environment, Philippa would have been exposed to ideas about commerce, finance, and international relations that were advanced for their time. As the second of 5 daughters in a family of 8 children, Philippa received an education befitting her status. Her childhood education would have focused on religious instruction, languages, literature, music, dancing, embroidery, and household management, the skills considered essential for a noblewoman who might one day manage a great household. Given her father's diplomatic connections, she likely learned French and perhaps some Latin, the language of diplomacy and scholarship. She may also have been familiar with Dutch or Flemish, languages commonly spoken in the Low Countries. The court of Hainault was known for its cultural refinement and artistic patronage. Count William maintained a sophisticated household that would have included musicians, artists, and scholars. Young Philippa would have been exposed to music, poetry, and visual arts, developing the appreciation for culture that she would later demonstrate as Queen of England. This cultural education was an important part of preparing noble daughters for potential marriage into other courts, where they would be expected to display refinement and taste appropriate to their status. Medieval childhood, particularly for noble girls, was often brief. Girls like Philippa were raised with the expectation that they would marry young and leave their birth families to join the households of their husbands. Marriage negotiations could begin when girls were still very young, sometimes even in infancy, though marriages typically were not consummated until the bride was at least 12 or 13 years old. For Philippa, preparation for her future role as a wife, possibly to a powerful lord or even a king, would have been a central focus of her upbringing. The religious education of a medieval noblewoman was particularly important. Daily life revolved around the rhythms of the Christian calendar, with its feast days, fasts, and liturgical seasons. Philippa would have attended Mass regularly and learned prayers, psalms, and the lives of the saints. This religious foundation would inform her later actions as queen, particularly her works of charity and her famous act of mercy at Calais. Medieval queenship was deeply intertwined with Christian ideals of feminine virtue, particularly mercy, charity, and intercession, qualities that Philippa would later exemplify. Philippa's siblings would play important roles in European politics and would help shape her own destiny. Her elder sister Margaret would marry Louis III of Bavaria, who became Holy Roman Emperor, placing her at the apex of European power structures. Another sister, Joan, married William V, Duke of Jülich. Her younger brother, William II, would eventually succeed their father as Count of Hainault, Holland, and Zealand. These family connections created a network of alliances that would later benefit Philippa in her role as Queen of England. Growing up in a large family of siblings, close in age, would have provided Philippa with early experiences in negotiation, compromise, and relationship management, skills that would serve her well in the complex political environment of the English court. Medieval noble households often raised not only the immediate family, but also the children of relatives or allied families, creating a rich social environment in which children learn to navigate relationships and hierarchies from an early age. Life at the court of Hainault would have followed seasonal patterns, with different activities and responsibilities depending on the time of year. Winters were spent largely indoors, with needlework, music, and storytelling as common pastimes. Spring and summer might bring hunting expeditions, garden walks, and visits to other noble houses. Autumn was a time of harvest and preparation for winter. Throughout the year, religious observances marked the passage of time, with special celebrations for major feast days like Christmas and Easter. The material culture surrounding young Philippa would have been rich and varied. Noble households in the early 14th century enjoyed luxury goods from throughout Europe and beyond, spices from the East, silks from Italy, furs from Scandinavia, and fine metalwork from Germany and France. The Counts of Hainault were known for their wealth and would have maintained a household filled with precious objects, fine textiles, and beautiful furnishings. These luxuries were not merely for comfort, but served as visible symbols of status and power, teaching Philippa from an early age about the material manifestations of nobility. Fashion in the early 14th century was evolving toward greater complexity and variety. Noble women, like Philippa, would have worn long gowns with increasingly fitted bodices, often made of rich fabrics like velvet, silk, or fine wool, in vibrant colours produced by expensive dyes. Headdresses were becoming more elaborate, and jewellery was an important signifier of status. The visual impression made by noble dress was an essential component of power and prestige, a lesson Philippa would carry with her to England. Beyond the walls of the Comital Palace, Valenciennes was a bustling medieval city with markets, churches, monasteries, and guild halls. The rhythm of urban life would have been familiar to Philippa. The sound of church bells marking the hours, the cries of street vendors, the bustle of market days, and the quiet of religious observances. This urban setting, more developed than many parts of England at the time, would have shaped her expectations and later influenced her approach to urban development and commerce as Queen of England. The political landscape of Europe was shifting dramatically during Philippa's childhood. The beginning of the 14th century saw increasing tensions between England and France that would eventually erupt into the 100 Years' War. The French monarchy was growing in power and centralization under the Capetian dynasty, while England, under Edward II, was experiencing political turmoil due to baronial opposition and conflict with Scotland. Meanwhile, the Holy Roman Empire was contested between different factions, and the papacy had moved from Rome to Avignon, coming under French influence. The path that would eventually lead Philippa to the English throne began to take shape when King Edward II of England sought an alliance with Flanders to benefit his realm. The wool trade between England and Flanders was economically crucial for both regions, and political alliance could help secure these commercial ties. Around 1323, Edward II sent Bishop Stapledon of Exeter as an ambassador to the continent. During his journey, the bishop visited the court of Hainault to assess Count William's daughters as potential brides for the young Prince Edward, heir to the English throne. Upon his return to England, Bishop Stapledon provided a detailed report to King Edward II about the daughters of Count William. A later annotation claims that the bishop's description was of Philippa, though historian Ian Mortimer argues it actually referred to her older sister Margaret. The description provides a rare glimpse into the physical appearance of a medieval noblewoman. The lady whom we saw has not uncomely hair betwixt blue, black and brown. Her face narrows between the eyes, and its lower part is more narrow than her forehead. Her eyes are blackish brown and deep. Her nose is fairly smooth and even, save that it is somewhat broad at the tip and flattened, and yet it is no snub nose. The account continues, noting details of her complexion, mouth, lips, teeth, ears, chin, neck, and overall form, creating an unusually comprehensive portrait for a medieval description. This attention to physical appearance reflects the importance placed on a potential royal bride's looks, not merely as a matter of personal preference, but as an indicator of health and fertility, crucial considerations for a marriage that needed to produce heirs. The bishop's report was clearly intended to help Edward II assess not just the diplomatic advantages of a match with Hainault, but also the personal suitability of Count William's daughters as potential mothers of future English kings. While this early mission did not immediately result in a marriage agreement, it planted the seed for the alliance that would eventually bring Philippa to England. Political circumstances would soon change dramatically, creating an unexpected opportunity for a marriage connection between Hainault and England. The political landscape of England was undergoing dramatic changes that would ultimately shape Philippa's destiny. By 1325, King Edward II of England had become increasingly unpopular due to his reliance on favourites, particularly Hugh Despenser the Younger. Edward's relationship with his French wife, Queen Isabella, had deteriorated severely, partly due to his excessive favouring of Despenser, whom many suspected had inappropriate influence over the king. The English barons resented Despenser's power, creating a dangerous political situation that threatened the stability of the realm. Queen Isabella, daughter of Philip IV of France, had initially been a loyal wife to Edward II, bearing him 4 children, including the future Edward III. However, by the 1320s, their relationship had broken down completely. In 1325, Isabella travelled to her native France, ostensibly on a diplomatic mission, to negotiate with her brother, King Charles IV, over disputed territories in Gascony. Once there, she refused to return to England, while the Despensers held influence over her husband, creating a diplomatic crisis. Isabella's extended stay in France soon evolved from a diplomatic mission into something more ominous. She began to gather around her discontented English exiles who had fled Edward II's regime, most notably Roger Mortimer, a powerful marcher lord who had escaped from the Tower of London in 1323 after being imprisoned for opposing the king. Rumours spread that Isabella and Mortimer had become lovers, adding scandal to what was already a politically volatile situation. In March 1326, Charles IV of France declared Edward II's French lands forfeit, increasing the tensions between the two kingdoms. Edward II, desperate to resolve the crisis, sent their son, the young Prince Edward, to France to perform homage to Charles IV in his father's place. This fateful decision placed the heir to the English throne in his mother's hands, giving Isabella a powerful piece in the political chess game that was unfolding. With the prince now in her custody, Isabella began actively planning to depose her husband. She needed military support and financial backing for such an ambitious undertaking. This led her to the court of Hainault, where Count William might provide the resources she needed. In the summer of 1326, Isabella and the young Prince Edward travelled to Hainault seeking aid. Count William of Hainault recognized the political opportunity presented by Isabella's request. Supporting her invasion could lead to a beneficial alliance with England if she succeeded, particularly if his daughter married the future king. However, it also carried significant risks if Isabella's gambit failed. After careful negotiation, a deal was struck. Count William would provide military and financial support for Isabella's invasion, in exchange for a marriage between Prince Edward and Philippa. The betrothal between Prince Edward and Philippa was formally arranged on August 27, 1326. For the 13-year-old Philippa, this agreement represented a dramatic change in her expected future. Rather than marrying a continental nobleman, as her sisters had done, she was now betrothed to the heir to the English throne, though at that moment it was far from certain whether Isabella's planned invasion would succeed or end in disaster. Since Philippa and Edward were second cousins, both being great-grandchildren of King Philip III of France, a papal dispensation was required for their marriage. This consanguinity, blood relationship, was within the prohibited degrees according to church law, necessitating special permission from the Pope. The dispensation was sent from Pope John XXIV at Avignon in September 1327, clearing the ecclesiastical hurdles to their union. Such dispensations were common for royal marriages, as the limited pool of suitable partners often meant that couples shared some degree of kinship. With Hainault's support secured, Isabella and Mortimer prepared for their invasion of England. On September 24, 1326, they landed in Suffolk with a small force of Hainault mercenaries. What followed was less a military campaign than a political revolution. Many English barons, long dissatisfied with Edward II's rule and the influence of the dispensers, rallied to Isabella's cause. As she advanced toward London, her support grew while the king's evaporated. Edward VI fled London with the dispensers, seeking refuge in the west of England. Hugh Despenser the Elder was captured and executed at Bristol in October. The king and Hugh Despenser the Younger attempted to escape to Ireland, but were captured in south of Wales in November. Despenser suffered a particularly brutal execution, while Edward II was imprisoned. In January 1327, Parliament met and declared that Edward II had failed in his duties as king. His son, Prince Edward, was proclaimed King Edward III on January 25, 1327. Though as he was only 14 years old, the realm would be governed by a regency council dominated by Isabella and Mortimer. The deposed Edward II remained imprisoned, first at Kenilworth Castle and later at Berkeley Castle, where he died in September 1327, under mysterious circumstances. While the official cause was given as natural illness, many contemporaries and most modern historians believe he was murdered on the orders of Isabella and Mortimer, who could not risk leaving such a dangerous political prisoner alive. These dramatic events created the context for Philippa's arrival in England. She was to be the queen of a young king, whose reign had begun under the shadow of his father's deposition, a politically precarious position that would require careful navigation. The marriage arrangement that had been made for political expediency now needed to be fulfilled to cement the alliance with Hainault that had helped place Edward III on the throne. In October 1327, Philippa married Edward by proxy through the Bishop of Coventry in a ceremony held in Valenciennes. This initial marriage ceremony, conducted while the bride and groom were in different countries, was a common practice for royal marriages, allowing the formal union to take place while practical arrangements for the bride's journey were being made. For Philippa, the proxy marriage marked the formal beginning of her role as Queen of England, though she had yet to set foot in her new kingdom. In December 1327, Philippa finally departed for England, escorted by her uncle John of Hainault, and a retinue befitting her new status. The winter crossing of the Channel was potentially hazardous, but they arrived safely on English shores. On December 23rd, she reached London, where chronicles report a rousing reception was accorded her. The people of England, eager for stability after years of misgovernment under Edward II and the political turmoil of his deposition, welcomed their new queen with enthusiasm and hope. Philippa's arrival in England marked her entry into a political environment very different from the one she had known in Hainault. England, in the late 1320s, was recovering from the political crises of Edward II's reign and adjusting to the new reality of a boy king nominally on the throne, but with his mother and her lover exercising actual power. The young queen would need to find her place in this complex and potentially dangerous court, building relationships and alliances while avoiding the factional conflicts that could easily destroy an unwary newcomer. The official, in-person marriage ceremony of King Edward III and Philippa of Hainault took place at York Minster on January 24, 1328. York rather than Westminster or London, was chosen as the venue due to its proximity to the Scottish border, where military concerns demanded the king's attention. The northern location also reflected the reality that Isabella and Mortimer, who controlled the government, were concerned about potential opposition in the south and felt safer conducting the royal wedding away from London. The marriage ceremony would have been a splendid occasion, with the great Cathedral of York decorated for the event and filled with nobles, clergy and officials. Both bride and groom were young, Edward around 15 and Philippa approximately 14. But such youthful marriages were common for medieval royalty. The marriage represented not just a personal union, but a political alliance between England and Hainault, potentially offering England a continental ally in its ongoing conflicts with France and Scotland. Despite their marriage, Edward and Philippa did not immediately enjoy the full status and authority associated with kingship and queenship. The realm remained under the de facto control of Queen Mother Isabella and her partner, Roger Mortimer, who had been created Earl of March. The young royal couple were essentially figureheads, with limited power to make independent decisions or even to control their own household arrangements. Philippa's coronation as Queen of England was delayed for 2 years, an unusual circumstance that reflected Isabella's reluctance to relinquish her own status and influence. During this initial period, Philippa was granted no lands and no income of her own, leaving her in a precarious position at the English court. This financial dependency ensured that she could not become a rival power centre to Isabella, who was determined to maintain her control over the kingdom through her influence over her son. Despite these limitations, Philippa began to adapt to her new country and role. Unlike some previous foreign queens who had alienated the English nobility by surrounding themselves with countrymen from their homeland, Philippa seems to have made a conscious effort to integrate into English society. While she maintained some Hainault attendants, she also welcomed English ladies and officials into her household, beginning to build the relationships that would serve her well in the future. The first years of Edward and Philippa's marriage coincided with a disastrous period in Anglo-Scottish relations. The Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton, signed in May 1328, recognised Scottish independence under King Robert the Bruce, abandoning English claims of overlordship that had been pursued since the time of Edward the Fern. This treaty, negotiated by the Mortimer-Isabella regime, was widely unpopular in England and was seen as a humiliating concession. For the young King Edward, who had inherited his grandfather Edward III's ambitions towards Scotland, it was particularly galling. In early 1330, significant changes occurred in Philippa's status. In February, she was finally crowned as Queen of England in a ceremony at Westminster Abbey. By this time, she was 5 months pregnant with her first child, a development that strengthened her position at court. The impending birth of a potential heir to the throne highlighted Philippa's crucial role in securing the dynasty's future and made it more difficult for Isabella to continue marginalizing her daughter-in-law. The birth of Edward and Philippa's first child, Edward of Woodstock, later known as the Black Prince, on June 15, 1330, marked a turning point in the young royal couple's fortunes. The arrival of a healthy male heir secured the succession and gave them increased political leverage. The birth took place at the royal residence of Woodstock Palace in Oxfordshire, which would become one of Philippa's favourite residences and the place after which her firstborn son was named. The months following the birth of the royal heir saw dramatic changes in the power structure of England. King Edward III, approaching his 18th birthday and now a father, grew increasingly resentful of the control exercised by his mother and Mortimer. The execution of his uncle Edmund, Earl of Kent, on Mortimer's orders in March 1330, had alarmed many nobles, and deepened Edward's determination to take control of his own kingdom. In October 1330, Edward staged a coup at Nottingham Castle, where the court was staying. With the support of a small group of loyal nobles, the young king arranged for his men to enter the castle through a secret tunnel. They arrested Mortimer in the middle of the night. Despite Isabella's famous plea, "Fair son, have pity on gentle Mortimer." Mortimer was taken to London and charged with numerous crimes, including the murder of Edward II, usurping royal power, and various acts of corruption. After a brief show trial, he was executed as a traitor at Tyburn on November 29, 1330. Queen Mother Isabella was removed from power, but treated with relative leniency. Perhaps due to Edward's filial respect despite her actions, she was initially placed under house arrest at Castle Rising in Norfolk. Though over time her circumstances improved, she eventually regained some lands and a degree of freedom, though she never again exercised political power. The fall of Isabella and Mortimer marked the true beginning of Edward III's personal rule, and consequently, Philippa's effective role as queen consort. With the overthrow of Mortimer and Isabella's removal from power, Edward III began his personal rule in earnest, and Philippa finally became queen in more than just name. After nearly 3 years of marriage, the young royal couple could now truly establish their own court and authority. This marked the beginning of what would prove to be one of the longest and most significant royal partnerships in English history, lasting for over 40 years and weathering numerous challenges, both domestic and foreign. The royal couple established their principal residence at Woodstock Palace in Oxfordshire, creating a household that would become known for its harmony and cultural sophistication. Woodstock had personal significance for them as the birthplace of their eldest son, and it offered a pleasant retreat from the political pressures of Westminster and London. Here, Philippa began to develop her own household and court, gathering around her ladies, officials, and cultural figures who would support her in her role as queen. As Queen of England, Philippa now received substantial lands and revenues befitting her status. These estates, collectively known as the Queen's Dower, provided her with financial independence and the resources to maintain her household, engage in patronage, and pursue her own initiatives. Managing these extensive properties required administrative skill and attention to detail, qualities that Philippa seems to have possessed in abundance. Unlike some previous foreign-born queens, Philippa did not alienate the English barons by bringing large numbers of her countrymen to the royal court. Her ability to adapt to English customs and her apparent fondness for her adopted country won her the respect and affection of the nobility and common people alike. While she maintained connections with her homeland and family in Hainault, she embraced her role as England's queen, without the cultural tensions that had sometimes plagued earlier foreign marriages. The birth of Edward and Philippa's first son, Edward of Woodstock, in June 1330, secured the succession and must have been a moment of immense relief for the young royal couple and for the realm as a whole. The Black Prince, as he would later be known, though not during his lifetime, would grow to become one of England's most celebrated military leaders, winning fame at the battles of Crecy and Poitiers. His birth marked the beginning of Philippa's remarkable fertility that would secure the Plantagenet dynasty for generations. In January 1332, Philippa gave birth to a daughter, Isabella, named after Edward's mother. Despite the political difficulties with Queen Isabella, the choice of name suggests a degree of reconciliation, or at least a recognition of family ties transcending political conflicts. Isabella would later marry Enguerrand VII, Lord of Coucy, a French nobleman, as part of Edward III's continental diplomatic strategy. A second daughter, Joan, named after Philippa's mother, was born in the Tower of London in late 1333 or early 1334. Joan's life would end tragically when she died of the Black Death in 1348, while travelling to Castile for her marriage to Peter the Cruel, King of Castile. Her death en route to her wedding was both a personal tragedy for the royal family and a diplomatic setback for Edward's foreign policy. The early years of Edward and Philippa's marriage coincided with significant developments in Anglo-Scottish relations. Following the death of Robert the Bruce in 1329, Scotland was ruled by his young son David II. The unpopular Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton, which had recognised Scottish independence, remained a source of resentment in England. Edward III sought to reassert English overlordship over Scotland, supporting Edward Balliol, son of the former King John Balliol, as a rival claimant to the Scottish throne. In 1333, Philippa accompanied Edward on his expedition to Scotland, demonstrating her willingness to support her husband's military endeavours. Her presence on such campaigns was unusual for a queen consort and indicates the close partnership that existed between Edward and Philippa from early in their marriage. While on this campaign, Edward achieved a significant victory at the Battle of Halidon Hill in July 1333, temporarily placing Edward Balliol on the Scottish throne as a puppet king. The Scottish child king, David II, fled to France for safety, beginning a long exile. Philippa's willingness to travel with Edward on campaign reflects the strong bond between them and her active involvement in affairs of state. Medieval queens were expected to support their husbands, but personal presence on military expeditions was beyond the norm. Her presence likely boosted morale among the troops and demonstrated the unified front presented by the royal couple. This pattern of shared activity and mutual support would characterize their relationship throughout their marriage. Between 1333 and 1338, Edward conducted several campaigns in Scotland, attempting to secure English dominance. While he achieved some military successes, establishing effective control over southern Scotland proved difficult, and the conflict remained unresolved. These Scottish wars provided Edward with valuable military experience, but ultimately proved a distraction from the larger conflict with France that was beginning to develop. On February 16, 1337, Philippa gave birth to a son named William at Hatfield. Sadly, this child survived only a few months, an all too common occurrence in an era of high infant mortality. Even royal children with the best available care were vulnerable to the many childhood diseases and health challenges of the medieval period. The loss of Prince William would have been a personal grief for Edward and Philippa, though the presence of their healthy heir, Edward of Woodstock, mitigated the dynastic implications of this loss. By 1336, Edward III's attention was increasingly drawn to continental affairs, particularly his relationship with France. The death of Charles IV of France in 1328 had left the French throne without a direct male heir. Edward III, as the son of Isabella of France, considered himself the rightful king of France through his mother's claim. However, the French nobility had supported Philip of Valois, who became King Philip VI, establishing the House of Valois on the French throne. This succession dispute laid the groundwork for the conflict that would later be known as the 100 Years' War. Initially, Edward III had paid homage to Philip for his French territories, but tensions between England and France grew over several issues, including French support for Scotland and disputes over Gascony. By 1337, these tensions erupted into open conflict when Philip VI confiscated the Duchy of Aquitaine. Edward III responded by formally claiming the French throne, initiating what would later be known as the 100 Years' War. This momentous decision would shape the remainder of Edward and Philippa's reign and lives. Before the outbreak of war with France, Philippa had already demonstrated her interest in England's economic development. Before 1335, she established a small colony of Flemish weavers at Norwich, reflecting her understanding of the textile industry from her homeland. and her desire to promote similar trade in England. Her repeated visits to Norwich showed her active engagement with the project and her commitment to fostering commerce within her adopted country. This initiative to bring Flemish weavers to Norwich was particularly significant because it helped transfer advanced textile production techniques to England. Flanders had long been the centre of Europe's textile industry, producing high-quality woolens using techniques more sophisticated than those commonly employed in England. By encouraging skilled Flemish craftsmen to settle in Norwich, Philippa helped elevate English textile production, reducing dependency on Flemish processing of English wool and increasing the value of English exports. This commercial initiative reflected her practical understanding of economics and her concern for England's prosperity. Philippa also encouraged coal mining on her estates in Tynedale, further illustrating her commercial acumen. Coal was becoming an increasingly important fuel source in medieval England, used for heating and various industrial processes. By developing mining operations on her lands, Philippa not only increased her own revenues, but contributed to the broader economic development of the region. These economic initiatives were not merely personal interests, but became increasingly important as the financial demands of the 100 Years' War mounted. The outbreak of the 100 Years' War created a complex situation for Philippa. Her husband was now claiming the throne of France and fighting against her maternal relatives, including her uncle Philip VI. This conflict between her birth family and her marital family might have created personal distress, but Philippa demonstrated unwavering loyalty to England and to Edward. Her commitment to her adopted country over her natal family illustrated the expectation that a queen's primary allegiance should be to her husband and his realm, a principle Philippa appears to have embraced wholeheartedly. In 1338, Edward and Philippa travelled to the Low Countries to arrange alliances in support of Edward's claim to the French throne. This diplomatic mission took them to Philippa's homeland, where her family connections proved valuable in securing support. During this extended stay on the continent, Philippa gave birth to their son Lionel of Antwerp on November 29, 1338. Lionel would later become Duke of Clarence and was noted for his exceptional height, reportedly growing to nearly 7 feet tall. While in the Low Countries, Edward III was able to build a network of allies, including the cities of Flanders and several German princes. He was recognized as Vicar General of the Holy Roman Empire by Emperor Louis IV, who was married to Philippa's elder sister Margaret. These alliances, facilitated in part by Philippa's family connections, would prove important in Edward's early campaigns against France. The diplomatic efforts in the Low Countries illustrated the practical value of royal marriages like that of Edward and Philippa. Her family connections opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed to English diplomacy, creating opportunities for alliance building that proved crucial in the early phases of the 100 Years' War. The personal relationships formed through royal marriages could have tangible political and military benefits, a reality that medieval monarchs well understood when arranging such unions. Philippa remained in Antwerp while Edward began his first major campaign against France. During this period, she gave birth to another son, John of Gaunt, in Ghent, on March 6, 1340. John would later become Duke of Lancaster and play a crucial role in English politics in the latter part of the 14th century. The name Gaunt was an anglicised form of Ghent, reflecting his birthplace in Flanders. This son would eventually become one of the most powerful figures in England, founding the House of Lancaster, from which the Tudor dynasty would later claim descent. The early phase of the 100 Years' War saw several naval engagements, culminating in the English victory at the Battle of Sluys in June 1340. This naval battle established English dominance in the Channel, but Edward's subsequent land campaign achieved limited success. Financial difficulties forced him to agree to a truce and returned to England in November 1340, leaving Philippa temporarily behind as a guarantee for debts he had incurred to fund his military activities. This situation, where a queen was left as surety for royal debts, indicates the precarious financial position of the English crown at this stage of the war. It also demonstrates Philippa's integral role in Edward's war effort. She was not merely a passive consort, but an active participant in the diplomatic and financial aspects of royal policy. Her willingness to remain behind, separated from her husband and some of her children, underscores her commitment to Edward's cause. Upon his return to England, Edward found the royal finances in disarray and blamed his ministers for mismanagement. His anger led to a political crisis that was eventually resolved, but it highlighted the enormous financial strain that the war with France placed on the English crown. Throughout these difficulties, Philippa remained a steadfast support for her husband and continued to bear children, securing the dynasty's future. In June 1341, Philippa gave birth to Edmund of Langley at King's Langley in Hertfordshire. Edmund would later be created Duke of York and would found the House of York, one of the key factions in the later Wars of the Roses. The birth of so many sons strengthened Edward's position, but also created a powerful group of royal princes whose descendants would eventually compete for the throne after the death of Philippa's grandson, Richard II, in 1399. Philippa's role as queen consort extended beyond childbearing. In November 1342, she was appointed guardian of John of Gaunt and her younger children, along with their lands. This appointment reflected Edward's trust in her administrative abilities and gave her significant responsibilities in managing the royal children's estates. Such administrative duties were an important aspect of queenly power, allowing Philippa to exercise authority and develop her own networks of officials and servants. The year 1343 saw the birth of Philippa and Edward's daughter Blanche, who unfortunately died shortly after birth. The following year, on October 10, 1344, another daughter, Mary, was born. Mary would later enter the religious life at Amesbury Priory, a common destination for royal daughters who did not marry. In 1346, Philippa gave birth to daughter Margaret, who would eventually marry John Hastings, Earl of Pembroke. Throughout this period of frequent pregnancies and childbirths, Philippa continued to fulfill her ceremonial and administrative duties as queen. Medieval queenship involved a complex balance of biological reproduction, cultural patronage, religious devotion, and practical governance. Philippa managed these multiple roles with apparent skill, earning the respect of contemporary chroniclers and the affection of the English people. The year 1346 marked a turning point in the 100 Years' War and a significant moment in Philippa's own story. While Edward III led a major expedition to France, Philippa was appointed to serve as regent in England. This appointment demonstrated the king's complete confidence in her abilities and judgment, placing her in a position of considerable authority during a time of war. While it was not customary in England for queens to serve as formal regents during their husbands' absences, unlike in France and other continental kingdoms, Philippa's appointment indicated Edward's recognition of her capabilities. Philippa's regency was soon tested when King David II of Scotland, ally of the French, invaded northern England while Edward was absent on the continent. This Scottish invasion, coordinated with Philip II of France to divide English military resources, posed a serious threat to the security of the realm. Facing this crisis, Philippa showed remarkable leadership and decisiveness. Responding to the Scottish invasion, Philippa travelled north to Durham, where English forces were gathering under the command of the Archbishop of York and the Northern Lords. Contemporary chronicles describe how Philippa rode among the soldiers before the battle, encouraging them with her presence and words. This personal intervention by a queen consort was highly unusual and made a strong impression on chroniclers. and presumably on the troops themselves. On October 17, 1346, the English and Scottish forces met at the Battle of Neville's Cross near Durham. The English army, inspired perhaps by Philippa's encouragement, achieved a decisive victory. King David II of Scotland was captured during the battle and would remain a prisoner in England for 11 years, a significant diplomatic and propaganda coup for Edward III. The victory at Neville's Cross eliminated the threat of Scottish invasion and allowed England to focus its military resources on the war with France. Philippa's role in this victory became part of her legend. While she did not personally command troops in battle, as some later accounts romantically suggested, her leadership during the crisis, her journey to the north, and her encouragement of the troops represented an expansion of the traditional boundaries of queenly behavior. By demonstrating courage and leadership in a military context typically reserved for men, she earned additional respect and enhanced her reputation. Meanwhile, Edward III had achieved his own stunning victory at the Battle of Calais in August 1346, one of the most significant English triumphs of the 100 Years' War. The English longbowmen proved devastatingly effective against French knights, establishing a military advantage that would serve England well in subsequent engagements. Following this victory, Edward laid siege to the port city of Calais, a strategically vital objective that could secure English control of the Channel. The siege of Calais lasted nearly a year, from September 1346 to August 1347. During this extended operation, Edward established a virtual English town around the besieged city, with substantial living quarters for himself and his commanders. As the siege progressed, Philippa joined her husband there, travelling to Calais after the immediate Scottish threat had been neutralised. Her presence at the siege camp underscored her continued involvement in Edward's military endeavours and the close partnership between the royal couple. The citizens of Calais endured terrible hardships during the siege, eventually reaching the point of starvation. King Philip VI of France attempted to relieve the city, but ultimately retreated without giving battle, abandoning Calais to its fate. In August 1347, with no hope of rescue and facing starvation, the citizens of Calais agreed to surrender. It was at this moment that the most famous episode of Philippa's life occurred, her intercession for the burghers of Calais. Edward, angered by the city's long resistance and the costs of the siege, demanded that 6 of the leading citizens or burghers come to him with ropes around their necks, bringing the keys to the city. He intended to execute them as an example to other towns that might consider defying English power. This harsh demand was consistent with medieval siege practices, where examples were often made of resistant cities to discourage further opposition. When the 6 burghers of Calais presented themselves to Edward, barefoot and dressed in shirts, with ropes around their necks as demanded, a dramatic scene unfolded. According to the chronicler Jean Froissart, Philippa fell to her knees before her husband and, weeping, begged him to spare the men's lives. She reportedly said, "Gentle sir, since I have crossed the sea from my home in great peril to be with you, I have desired nothing of you. Now therefore I humbly beg you, in honour of God and for the love of me, that ye will have mercy on these 6 citizens." Moved by her passionate plea, Edward relented, saying, "Dame, I wish you had been elsewhere, but I cannot refuse you. Take them, they are yours." Philippa then took custody of the burghers, provided them with food and clothing, and ensured their safe return to the city. This act of mercy and compassion greatly enhanced Philippa's reputation among both the English and the French, and the story has been immortalized in art and literature through the centuries, including in Auguste Rodin's famous sculpture, The Burghers of Calais. The extent to which this episode was genuine mercy or calculated political theatre has been debated by historians. Some suggest that Edward may have already decided to spare the burghers, but created this dramatic scenario to demonstrate both his power and his magnanimity through Philippa's intercession. Whatever the truth, the incident cemented Philippa's image as a compassionate queen who could temper her husband's martial severity with feminine mercy, an ideal balance in medieval conceptions of gendered rulership. This episode at Calais illustrates one of the key aspects of medieval queenship, the role of the queen as intercessor. Queens were expected to soften the sometimes harsh justice of kings, pleading for mercy on behalf of subjects. This intercessory role had religious parallels, with the Virgin Mary often depicted interceding with Christ on behalf of sinners. By successfully fulfilling this cultural expectation, Philippa reinforced her status as an ideal queen consort according to medieval values. The capture of Calais represented a significant military achievement for Edward III. The city would remain in English hands for over 200 years, serving as a crucial foothold on the continent and a base for further military operations against France. The victory enhanced Edward's reputation as a military leader and strengthened his position in the ongoing struggle for the French crown. Following the victories at Crecy and Calais, and the concurrent English success at Neville's Cross, Edward III returned to England in triumph. He had demonstrated English military prowess, secured a valuable continental possession, and seen his wife successfully defend the northern border against Scottish invasion. These achievements marked a high point in Edward's reign and in the prestige of the English monarchy on the European stage. The year 1348, however, brought tragedy to the royal family and to England as a whole with the arrival of the Black Death. This catastrophic plague swept across Europe, causing unprecedented mortality and social disruption. It likely originated in Central Asia and travelled along trade routes, reaching Europe through Italian ports and spreading rapidly throughout the continent. England was struck in the summer of 1348, with the disease moving gradually from the south coast northward throughout the realm. The royal family was not spared from the plague's effects. 3 of Edward and Philippa's children died during the outbreak of 1348-1349. Their daughter Joan and young sons Thomas and William. Joan's death was particularly poignant. She had been betrothed to Peter of Castile, son of Alfonso V of Castile, in 1345, and left England in the summer of 1348 to journey to Castile for her marriage. This union was intended to strengthen England's alliance with Castile against France, representing an important diplomatic initiative. While staying at Bordeaux, in English-controlled Gascony, Joan was exposed to the plague that was ravaging the region. As members of her entourage began falling ill and dying, Joan was moved to a small village, likely Loremo, but she too succumbed to the Black Death on September 13, 1348. Edward III learned of his daughter's death while at the siege of Calais, a personal tragedy amid his military triumph. The deaths of Thomas and William, the young sons born to Philippa in 1347 and 1348 respectively, added to the royal family's grief. While infant and child mortality was common in medieval times, even among the nobility, the loss of 3 children in such a short period would have been a severe emotional blow to Edward and Philippa. Their personal tragedy was replicated in thousands of families across England, as the Black Death claimed between a third and half of the population. The Black Death had profound social, economic and psychological effects on medieval England. Labour shortages following the massive population decline led to increased wages and mobility for surviving workers, weakening the traditional feudal structure. The psychological impact of such widespread death affected religious practices, artistic expressions, and social attitudes. For Philippa and Edward, the plague represented not just personal tragedy, but a challenge to the governance and stability of the realm during a time of continuing international conflict. Despite these personal tragedies, Edward and Philippa continued to fulfill their royal duties. In 1348, Edward founded the Order of the Garter, England's highest order of chivalry. This prestigious order, which still exists today, initially consisted of the King, the Prince of Wales, and 24 companions chosen from among the highest nobility. The order reflected Edward's vision of chivalric kingship and served as a method of binding the greatest lords of the realm to the crown through honours and obligations. The foundation of the Order of the Garter represented Edward's cultivation of chivalric ideals as a component of royal authority. By celebrating and rewarding martial prowess, loyalty, and noble behaviour, Edward sought to channel the energies of the aristocracy towards service to the crown. Philippa, as queen, played a role in the ceremonial aspects of the order, participating in its rituals and celebrations. The order's annual feast at Windsor Castle became an important court occasion, displaying the splendour and dignity of the English monarchy. In 1350, Philippa witnessed a naval engagement from a unique vantage point. Her eldest son, Edward the Black Prince, was involved in a battle against the Castilian fleet off Winchelsea, on the south coast of England. Philippa and her ladies observed the battle from a convent on the shore, watching as the Black Prince's ship, the cog Thomas, was sunk during the fighting. The prince made a daring escape from the sinking vessel, and Philippa witnessed his household galley, La Salle du Roi, nearly being captured before being saved by the quick action of a Flemish squire who cut the enemy ship's rigging. This dramatic episode illustrates the dangers faced by the royal family during this period of conflict and Philippa's direct exposure to the perils of war. The Battle of Winchelsea, sometimes called the Battle of Les Espagnols sur Mer, the Spaniards on the sea, resulted in an English victory. The engagement was notable for the personal participation of both King Edward III and the Black Prince, demonstrating the Plantagenet emphasis on martial leadership. For Philippa, watching her husband and eldest son in mortal danger must have been a harrowing experience, even as it exemplified the military ethos that defined Edward III's kingship. Throughout the 1350s, the war with France continued intermittently. The truce that had followed the capture of Calais gradually broke down, and hostilities resumed. The Black Prince, now a formidable military leader in his own right, led campaigns in France that culminated in the great English victory at Poitiers in 1356, where King John II of France was captured. This second capture of a monarch, following the Scottish king at Neville's Cross, represented the height of English military success during Edward III's reign. The capture of the French king was a diplomatic and propaganda coup of the highest order. John II was brought to England and treated with the respect due to royal status, but his presence as a prisoner represented a powerful symbol of English ascendancy in the conflict. Negotiations for his ransom and for a comprehensive peace settlement became a central focus of English diplomacy. In the late 1350s, Philippa gave birth to her last child, Thomas of Woodstock, in January 1355. Thomas would later become Duke of Gloucester and played a significant role in the political struggles of Richard II's reign, eventually being murdered on the orders of his nephew the King in 1397. With this final birth, Philippa had provided Edward with an impressive dynasty, 7 sons and 5 daughters, though not all survived to adulthood. This remarkable fertility was a crucial component of Philippa's success as a queen consort. In an era when the primary duty of a queen was to provide heirs, Philippa excelled beyond all expectations. Her ability to produce numerous healthy children, particularly sons, secured the Plantagenet succession for generations to come, and gave Edward III a degree of dynastic security that few medieval monarchs enjoyed. This abundance of royal offspring would later have unforeseen consequences, as the numerous lines of descent from Edward III would contribute to the dynastic conflicts of the 15th century. As Philippa entered middle age, she continued to be actively involved in court life and in supporting her husband's reign. Her popularity with the English people remained strong, helping to maintain domestic peace throughout Edward's long reign. Unlike earlier foreign queens of England, she had successfully integrated into English society while maintaining her own identity and influence. In 1356, Philippa's uncle, King John II of Bohemia, died fighting for the French at the Battle of Poitiers. This personal connection to one of the casualties of the 100 Years' War illustrates the complex web of family relationships that transcended the political divisions of medieval Europe. For Philippa, the war between her husband and France potentially placed her between conflicting loyalties, though she appears to have remained steadfastly committed to English interests throughout the conflict. The Treaty of Bretigny in 1360 temporarily halted the 100 Years' War, bringing a period of peace between England and France. Under the terms of the treaty, Edward III renounced his claim to the French throne in exchange for expanded territories in France, including full sovereignty over Gascony, Calais, and other regions. The enormous ransom for King John II of France was set at 3 million gold crowns, a staggering sum that placed a severe burden on French finances. This period of peace allowed the English court to focus more on domestic matters and cultural pursuits. The 1360s saw increased attention to architecture, literature, and the arts, with royal patronage supporting various projects. Philippa, as queen, participated in this cultural flowering, supporting writers and artists through her patronage. Her court became a centre for literary activity, attracting poets and chroniclers who recorded the events and personalities of the age. Around 1360, however, Philippa suffered a personal setback when she broke her shoulder blade in an accident. This injury forced her to spend the remainder of her life largely immobile, significantly curtailing her activities. The physical limitations imposed by this injury would have been particularly difficult for someone who had previously been so active, accompanying her husband on campaigns and travelling extensively throughout the realm. During this period of Philippa's physical decline, Edward III began a relationship with Alice Perrers, a lady-in-waiting to the Queen. Alice was of obscure origins, but became enormously influential at court through her relationship with the king. This liaison would eventually produce 3 illegitimate children and would have significant political implications after Philippa's death. However, there is no evidence of public scandal during Philippa's lifetime, suggesting that Edward maintained at least the appearance of propriety while his wife lived. The king's relationship with Alice Perrers has been the subject of much historical speculation. Some historians suggest that it began only after Philippa became physically incapacitated, representing Edward's need for companionship rather than a rejection of his wife. Others view it more critically as a betrayal of the Queen. In either case, Edward's fidelity to Philippa for the first 3 decades of their marriage was remarkable for a medieval king, indicating the strength of their relationship during the prime years of their lives. Despite her reduced mobility, Philippa maintained her intellectual and cultural interests from 1361 until her death. The chronicler Jean Froissart served as her secretary. Froissart, who had come to England from Hainault, wrote extensively about the events of his time, and his chronicles remain a valuable historical source for the period. His connection to Philippa ensured that her perspective and the events of the English court were recorded for posterity. Froissart's chronicle provides us with some of the most detailed accounts of Philippa's activities and character. He described her as the most gentle queen, most liberal, and most courteous that ever was queen in her days, a tribute that reflects the high regard in which she was held by contemporaries. His work preserves many of the stories and anecdotes that have shaped our understanding of Philippa and her role in Edward III's court. Philippa was also a patron of literature and owned several illuminated manuscripts, indicating her appreciation for the arts and learning. Among these was a richly illuminated compilation now preserved in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. Such patronage was an important aspect of queenship, allowing royal women to exercise cultural influence even when their direct political power was limited. In 1361 or 1362, Philippa may have played a role in the foundation of Queen's Hall, later the Queen's College, at Oxford University. While traditional accounts attributed the founding directly to Philippa, it was actually established by her chaplain, Robert de Eaglesfield. However, Philippa was the college's patron and protector, using her influence to support its development, especially after Eaglesfield's death. The college, which still exists today, stands as a testament to Philippa's interest in education and learning. The 1360s also saw several of Philippa's children married in unions that strengthened England's diplomatic position. Her daughter Isabella married Enguerrand VII, Lord of Coucy, in 1365, an alliance that helped secure French noble support for the Treaty of Bretigny. Her son Lionel, Duke of Clarence, married Elizabeth de Burgh, a wealthy Irish heiress, gaining substantial lands in Ireland. Edmund of Langley later married Isabella of Castile, daughter of Pedro the Cruel, as part of an alliance with Castile against France. These marriages reflected Edward III's strategy of using matrimonial alliances to strengthen England's international position. Philippa, with her own experience as a diplomatic bride, would have understood the political importance of these unions, even as she might have had maternal concerns for her children's happiness in these arranged marriages. The network of family connections created through these unions extended English influence across Europe, though not all proved politically successful in the long term. In 1364 or 1365, Edward III demanded the return of Hainault and other inheritances which had been given over to the Dukes of Bavaria-Straubing in the name of Philippa. But he was unsuccessful, as the custom in those regions favoured male heirs. This attempt to claim continental territories through Philippa's inheritance rights illustrated the continuing importance of her family connections in Edward's diplomatic strategy, even decades after their marriage. It also demonstrated the limitations of such claims when confronted with different inheritance customs in various European regions. By 1367, as her health continued to decline, Philippa commissioned her tomb in Westminster Abbey. This alabaster effigy, executed by the sculptor Jean de Liège of Brabant, was placed on the northeast side of the chapel of Edward the Confessor. The fact that Philippa planned her monument during her lifetime indicates her concern for her legacy and her place in the sacred space of Westminster Abbey, where English kings and queens were traditionally buried. The tomb, though now somewhat damaged, originally featured a beautiful alabaster effigy that is considered to be a true portrait of Philippa rather than an idealized representation. It shows her with a plump figure and a kindly face, wearing a reticulated, net-like headdress, tight bodice laced in front, and buttoned sleeves. The queen originally held the string of her cloak in one hand and a scepter in the other, though the hands are now broken. The realism of the effigy provides a rare glimpse into the actual appearance of a medieval queen, suggesting that Philippa was heavy-set but dignified in her later years. The tomb was originally surrounded by many weepers, small statues of mourning figures, though only 2 survive today. These included representations of various saints and family members, creating a comprehensive memorial program that reflected Philippa's royal status and family connections. The expense and elaboration of the tomb, commissioned during her lifetime, indicates Edward III's continuing respect and affection for his wife, despite his relationship with Alice Perrers. By 1367, Philippa was suffering from dropsy, a swelling of the body due to weakness of the heart that we would now recognize as edema or heart failure. This condition would have caused increasing discomfort and difficulty in movement, adding to the limitations already imposed by her shoulder injury. Her condition continued to deteriorate over the next 2 years, marking a slow decline in her health and capabilities. To compound her physical suffering, she also experienced the loss of her favorite son, Lionel, Duke of Clarence, who died in 1368 at the age of 29, possibly from food poisoning during a visit to Italy. This loss would have been a severe blow to Philippa, already weakened by her own illness. The death of adult children was a grief that many medieval parents experienced, but it remained a profound sorrow regardless of its frequency in that era. On August 15, 1369, Queen Philippa died at Windsor Castle. She was approximately 55 years old and had been Queen of England for over 40 years. Her death marked the end of an era in Edward III's reign. As was customary for royal funerals, there was a significant delay between her death and burial. Her state funeral was finally held on January 9, 1370, nearly 5 months after her death. This delay between death and burial was common for medieval royalty and allowed time for elaborate funeral preparations. The body would be embalmed and might lie in state in various locations before the final interment. The funeral would have been an elaborate ceremony with the great nobles of the realm in attendance and extensive religious observances. The Queen was buried in the tomb she had commissioned in Westminster Abbey near the shrine of Edward the Confessor, the most sacred space in the abbey. The chronicler Jean Froissart, who had served her faithfully, described Philippa as the most gentle queen, most liberal, and most courteous that ever was queen in her days. This tribute reflected the high regard in which she was held by contemporaries. Another medieval writer, Joshua Barnes, said that Queen Philippa was a very good and charming person, who exceeded most ladies for the sweetness of nature and virtuous disposition. These contemporaneous assessments of Philippa's character suggest that she exemplified the virtues most valued in a medieval queen: gentleness, generosity, courtesy, and a sweet disposition. Such qualities were not merely personal attributes, but political assets, helping to soften the sometimes harsh exercise of royal power and creating goodwill toward the monarchy. Philippa's popularity contributed significantly to the stability and prestige of Edward III's reign. Philippa's death had a profound effect on Edward III and on the governance of England. Without her steadying influence, Edward increasingly fell under the domination of his mistress, Alice Perrers, who became notorious for her rapacity and influence over the aging king. Alice was said to have taken advantage of Edward's growing senility in his final years, accumulating enormous wealth and interfering in legal cases for profit. Her influence was widely resented, and the contrast with the beloved Philippa only heightened public disapproval of her role. The last years of Edward's reign, which had begun with such promise and had seen such military glory, became marked by political factionalism and declining royal authority. The Black Prince, long the heir apparent, was suffering from a debilitating illness, probably contracted during his campaigns in Spain, leaving him increasingly unable to counterbalance the influence of Alice Perrers and other self-interested courtiers. The deaths of other experienced advisors and the king's own declining health created a power vacuum that various factions sought to fill. In 1376, the Good Parliament met and attempted to address corruption at court, specifically targeting Alice Perrers and other perceived negative influences around the king. The Commons, led by Peter de la Mare, impeached several of the king's ministers and passed ordinances banishing Alice from court. However, after the Parliament was dissolved, John of Gaunt, now the most powerful of Philippa's surviving sons, engineered the reversal of these measures, allowing Alice to return to the king's side. The Black Prince died on June 8, 1376, predeceasing his father. This loss was a severe blow to the elderly Edward III and to the stability of the succession. The Black Prince's son, Richard of Bordeaux, became the heir apparent at only 9 years old, creating the prospect of another child king if Edward died soon, a situation that had proven problematic during Edward's own early reign. Edward III survived Philippa by 8 years, dying on June 21, 1377, at the age of 64. He was buried beside her in Westminster Abbey, reuniting the royal couple who had shared such a long and largely successful partnership in life. By all accounts, their 40-year marriage had been unusually happy for a medieval royal union, especially one arranged for political purposes. The king's final years, marked by physical and possibly mental decline, stood in stark contrast to the vigour and success of his earlier reign. Alice Perrers was said to have abandoned him on his deathbed, stripping rings from his fingers before fleeing. With Edward's death, his grandson Richard II ascended the throne at the age of 10. The new king was surrounded by his uncles, the surviving sons of Edward III and Philippa, who would play crucial roles in the politics of his reign. John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, Edmund of Langley, Duke of York, and Thomas of Woodstock, Duke of Gloucester, represented different factions and interests, sometimes supporting and sometimes opposing their young nephew. Philippa's legacy lived on through several avenues. The Queen's College, Oxford, was founded by her chaplain, Robert de Eaglesfield, in her honour. Though Philippa herself did not establish the college, as is sometimes claimed, she used her influence on its behalf, especially after Eaglesfield's death. The institution continues to exist today as one of Oxford University's constituent colleges, a lasting memorial to the Queen's patronage of education. Philippa's support for the textile industry, particularly her establishment of Flemish weavers at Norwich, had lasting economic impacts. Norwich developed into one of England's major centres of textile production, an industry that would become increasingly important to the English economy in subsequent centuries. Her initiatives in coal mining similarly contributed to the development of an industry that would eventually help fuel England's Industrial Revolution, though that lay far in the future. Perhaps Philippa's most significant legacy, however, was through her numerous descendants. Her children and grandchildren shaped English history for generations to come. Her eldest surviving son, Edward the Black Prince, predeceased his father, but left a son, Richard II, who succeeded Edward III as king. Her third son, John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, became one of the most powerful figures in late 14th century England and founded the House of Lancaster through his son, the future Henry III. Philippa's fourth son, Edmund of Langley, Duke of York, established the House of York. The rivalry between the descendants of these sons would eventually erupt into the devastating Wars of the Roses in the 15th century, as the houses of Lancaster and York competed for the English throne. In this sense, Philippa's remarkable fertility, which had seemed such a blessing during Edward III's reign, had the unintended consequence of creating too many lines of royal descent with competing claims to the throne. Beyond her biological legacy, Philippa left an enduring impression on the concept of queenship in England. She had successfully balanced the various roles expected of a medieval queen: diplomatic asset, royal wife, prolific mother, cultural patron, and occasional political actor. Her intervention at Calais embodied the ideal of the merciful queen, tempering the necessary harshness of kingship, a gendered conception of complementary rule that would influence expectations of queenly behavior for centuries to come. Philippa's economic initiatives, including her promotion of the textile industry and coal mining, reflected her practical understanding of governance and her concern for England's prosperity. These contributions extended the traditional boundaries of queenly influence into realms typically dominated by men, demonstrating her intelligence and adaptability. Her background in the commercially advanced Low Countries gave her insights into economic development that proved valuable in her adopted country. As regent during Edward's absence in 1346, she had proven her capacity for leadership during crisis, organising the defence against Scottish invasion and contributing to the victory at Neville's Cross. This episode showed that, when necessary, a queen consort could step into more direct political and even military roles. While medieval gender norms generally limited women's participation in warfare, exceptional circumstances could create opportunities for queens to demonstrate leadership beyond the usual constraints. Philippa's reputation for kindness and generosity endured long after her death. The anecdotes of her piety and compassion that were preserved by chroniclers attested to her popularity with all levels of society. In 1331, for instance, she interceded with the king on behalf of some carpenters whose careless work had resulted in an accident injuring herself and her ladies. Rather than seeking punishment, she asked for mercy, a pattern that would reach its most famous expression in her intervention for the burghers of Calais. Her ability to adapt to English customs while maintaining connections to her homeland allowed her to serve as an effective diplomatic bridge between England and the Low Countries. She never alienated the English people by appearing too foreign or by favouring her countrymen over native English subjects, a mistake made by some foreign-born consorts before and after her. This delicate balance between maintaining her own identity and embracing her adopted country contributed significantly to her popularity and effectiveness. Throughout her life, Philippa embodied the ideal of a medieval queen consort, enhancing her husband's rule through her complementary qualities and avoiding the pitfalls that had undermined other queens. Her popularity helped maintain domestic peace during Edward's long reign, allowing him to focus on his continental ambitions and military campaigns. The contrast between the stable years of her influence and the troubled final period of Edward's reign after her death highlighted her importance to effective governance. The personal relationship between Edward and Philippa appears to have been genuinely affectionate, unusual in an era when royal marriages were arranged for political advantage rather than personal compatibility. Edward addressed letters to his wife as "my very sweetheart," and they spent most of their time together, even when royal duties might have justified separation. This closeness undoubtedly contributed to the stability of Edward's reign and to Philippa's effectiveness as queen. In the centuries following her death, Philippa's intervention for the burghers of Calais became one of the most celebrated episodes in English historical memory. The story was immortalized in paintings, sculptures, and literature, including Auguste Rodin's famous monumental sculpture, The Burghers of Calais, completed in 1889. This artistic legacy ensured that Philippa's act of mercy would be remembered even by those with little knowledge of 14th century English history. Recent historical scholarship has brought renewed attention to Philippa's contributions beyond this famous incident. Historians have explored her economic initiatives, her patronage networks, her role in court ceremonies, and her management of the royal household. This research has provided a more nuanced understanding of how queens exercised power in medieval England, often through indirect means rather than formal authority. The study of Philippa's life has been enriched by interdisciplinary approaches, including art history, literary analysis, and gender studies. Her tomb effigy, for example, provides valuable information about medieval fashion and physical appearance, while analysis of financial records reveals patterns of expenditure and patronage that illuminate her interests and priorities. Chronicles, letters, and other written sources offer glimpses into her personality and relationships, allowing historians to reconstruct aspects of her life beyond the formal outlines of political events. Philippa of Hainault lived during a pivotal period in English history, as the kingdom transformed from a somewhat peripheral European power to a formidable military force with continental ambitions. Her 40-year partnership with Edward III coincided with significant developments in England's political institutions, military capabilities, cultural expression, and economic activities. Through it all, she provided stability, continuity, and wise counsel, embodying the ideal of queenship that combined feminine virtues of mercy and piety with practical wisdom and diplomatic skill. The England of Philippa's time was experiencing profound social, economic, and cultural changes. The catastrophe of the Black Death in the mid-14th century accelerated transformations in the feudal system, as labor shortages empowered surviving peasants and weakened traditional bonds of service. The 100 Years' War stimulated national consciousness and pride, while placing enormous financial burdens on the crown and the realm. Cultural expressions in literature, art, and architecture were evolving, with increasing use of the English language in place of French or Latin among the educated classes. Within this dynamic context, Philippa played a stabilizing role, maintaining traditions while adapting to new circumstances. Her patronage of writers like Froissart helped preserve and transmit cultural values, even as society changed around her. Her economic initiatives responded to the financial pressures of warfare while promoting England's commercial development. Her religious patronage reinforced the central role of the church in medieval life, while supporting educational advancement through institutions like Queen's College. In the final assessment, Philippa of Hainault deserves to be remembered as more than just Edward III's wife or the mother of his children. She was a queen who used the limited formal power available to women of her era to make lasting contributions to her adopted country. From her intervention at Calais to her economic initiatives, from her cultural patronage to her capable regency, Philippa demonstrated that a queen consort could shape history through intelligence, character, and strategic influence, even within the constraints of medieval gender roles. Her life story reminds us that behind the great kings and battles that dominate traditional historical narratives, there were often remarkable women whose contributions, though less celebrated, were no less real or significant. In Philippa's case, her compassion at Calais may have saved lives directly, but her steady influence throughout Edward III's reign likely prevented far more suffering by helping to maintain domestic peace during a period of external warfare. For this reason, she truly deserves the title often given to her, one of England's most beloved queens. As darkness falls on our journey through the life of this remarkable medieval queen, we can reflect on how Philippa's story demonstrates the power of compassion, wisdom, and steadfast devotion. From her youthful betrothal to her final days at Windsor Castle, Philippa navigated the complexities of power and privilege with grace and humanity, leaving an indelible mark on English history. In our modern world, so distant from the medieval courts and battlefields of Philippa's time, perhaps we can still find inspiration in her example, in her mercy toward the burghers of Calais, in her practical initiatives to improve England's economy, in her steadfast support of her family and kingdom through decades of challenge and change. Her story reminds us that the exercise of power need not be harsh to be effective, that compassion can be a strength rather than a weakness, and that a life dedicated to service can leave a legacy that endures for centuries. The soft echoes of Philippa's footsteps through the corridors of medieval castles have long faded, and the sound of her voice encouraging English troops before battle has been silenced by time. Yet her influence lives on, in the institutions she supported, in the economic initiatives she pioneered, in the family lines she established, and in the model of queenship she perfected, though she wore no crown of her own making, and issued no decrees in her sole name. Philippa of Hainault shaped the England of her time and the centuries that followed through the quiet but persistent exercise of queenly influence. As you drift towards sleep, gentle listener, carry with you the quiet legacy of Queen Philippa of Hainault, not of conquest or glory, but of compassion and wisdom that transcend the centuries, whispering still of a queen who knew that true greatness lies not in displays of power, but in acts of mercy that endure in memory long after crowns have turned to dust. Sleep well, dear friend, until we meet again for another gentle journey through history's quieter corridors, where remarkable lives like Philippa's wait to share their timeless wisdom with those who listen with heart and mind open to the soft lessons of the past.